No one knew what was in Fritz's garage when they found him dead on the floor of his bathroom. A secret collection worth a lot of money. Over 75 old motorbikes, including a $250K 1947 Indian Chief prototype that is one of a kind. George Lucas thought that Aerosmith's Lost Tour van and a Star Wars Yoda prototype were both destroyed. It wasn't his riches that shocked everyone the most. The handwritten writings were what showed the horrible truth about his last days. Who was trying to steal his $6 million income and why he was really fired from American Pickers. Fritz was born in Davenport, Iowa in 1963. He wasn't like the other kids even when he was a little boy. Frank was putting rocks, coins, stamps, and even old beer cans all over his room, while most kids were riding bikes or swapping baseball cards. The other kids didn't even notice the things he looked for. People who knew him, Bill and Susan, thought it was just a harmless hobby, but Frank saw something valuable in these lost things and decided to keep them. He said that he used to save all the pins from school papers. That's how deep it went. At the time, it seemed strange that he was interested in razor blades, but it was an early sign that he could see things that other people missed. Frank went to Sudell Elementary School and then Betonworth High School as he got older. That's where he met Wolfie. When they first clicked, they were in 8th grade. It didn't take long for them to start shopping at yard sales and flea markets on the weekends. Both boys liked the same kinds of things. Things that were strange, dirty, and forgotten, but had stories to tell. Frank didn't go the standard school route, even though some teachers thought he would do well that way. He didn't think college would teach him the most important things. He thought that the only way to really know something was to touch old things, learn about their history, and figure out what made them important. Frank became a fire inspector for a big part of Iowa after high school. He worked in that field for almost 25 years, but he never stopped gathering. It might have even grown. He had already started buying bikes when he was a teenager. He paid over $400 for a 1964 Harley Davidson when he was only 16 years old. That was a lot of money back then. People were shocked by him. Frank thought it was more than just a bike, though. It was historical. To pay for his new hobby, he worked hard at places like Coast to Coast Hardware and Quad City Automatic Sprinkler. He finally had more than 100 old motorcycles. He even built a barn to keep them all in. His name was known to bikers for a long time before he ever showed up on TV, because he went to the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally in South Dakota every year. That's not the only thing that made Frank unique. It was how he got things. That's what he called his eye. When he went into an old barn or shed, he saw things that other people didn't. He looked through old, dusty buildings for years, making notes on where to find cool things and thinking about the people who used to live there. He didn't just gather things, he also gathered stories about them. This changed him from a collector who didn't pay much attention to each find to someone who saw each one as a piece of history being saved from the trash. Frank's love for gathering grew even while he was working as a fire inspector. He often found things that had been left behind when he was checking out old houses. Fire helmets, sirens, and old-fashioned gear. It wasn't like these were just lost tools. They were bits and pieces of the past. Frank was able to spot them. His checks turned into more than that. Behind the safety reports and fire rules were treasure hunts. Over time, this strange mix of jobs, inspector by day, picker at heart, made him the expert he would become. As an inspector, he learned to pay more attention to the little things. He learned how to read cities and see things other people didn't. After that skill helped him find secret gems when he went into antique shops or storage sheds. He wasn't guessing. He had a plan. He had trained his eyes to see things that other people missed by scanning walls and looking for dangers for years. Later, that edge would help him on American Pickers when he had to sort through tons of trash to find something really important. Everything changed in a split second. Frank bought an old, simple thing for only $15 and then sold it for $475. He thought about that sale a lot. It was impressive in more ways than just the money it brought in. It was realizing that what he knew was useful. He had studied these things for years, and now it was paying off. He learned from that deal that his hobby could turn into a real business. After that, he stopped seeing gathering as a hobby and started seeing it as a way to build something bigger. Frank made the choice to jump in 2002. He quit his job as a fire inspector and opened a store in Savannah, Illinois, called Frank's Finds. It wasn't just a store. It was like a small museum, full of firefighter gear, old tools, and things that most people had forgotten they had. The building itself had a past. It was an old opera house with a bar connected to it. Going inside made you feel like you were in a different time. Some people who came said it smelled musty and looked dark, but Frank thought that was part of the beauty. His world was rough, real, and full of interesting people. Over time, collectors and curious tourists came to the shop all the time. People would come just to look at the strange and interesting things that were there. The setup wasn't loved by everyone. Some people had trouble getting around, but people who knew what Frank was talking about saw the point. The shop and everything in it set the stage for his next adventure. When TV came calling, Frank was all set. He didn't need to do anything. He only had to be himself. The person who always thought that everything had a story to tell and saw gold where others saw trash. You may remember Mike Wolfe from the TV show American Pickers. He used to hunt for old treasures with a camera in his hand. It was around 2002 when he began shooting his travels. Frank Fritz, an old friend, had just quit his steady job as a fire inspector and opened his own antique shop in Savannah, Illinois. Frank liked running his shop, which had old toys, oil cans, and bikes from the past. Mike wasn't planning to go on the road, but he had an idea. He thought their trips to pick apples could lead to something bigger, and he tried for months to get Frank to join him. Frank wasn't sure. He liked the shop. It didn't change. It was his. Things changed one day, though. Frank paid $115 for a small badge from a social group. It didn't look like much. After that, he got $450 for it. He called it a gambler's high because it made him feel good. Mike kept pushing Frank, and that feeling finally made him decide to give it a try. He locked his doors, gathered his things, and followed Mike out on the road. These first trips, which were filmed on the spot, were the first things that TV directors were interested in. Everything changed when American Pickers first aired in January 2010. A lot of people watched Frank every week when he was just a quiet shop owner. More than 3 million people watched the first show. One of the most important firsts in History Channel history, Frank, with his beard, stocky build, and quiet voice, was the exact opposite of Mike, who was always on the go. It made people love him. Soon, fans were waiting in line just to see them live. When they went to the California Surf Museum that October, there were a lot of people outside. "What are all these people doing here?" Frank asked with a confused look on his face. He then stayed and signed pictures until there were none left. After only 8 months, one episode of the show was seen by 3 million people. Frank was now famous. In the beginning, their trips were just random experiences. No one knew what they were going to do, so they drove around in a white Mercedes van and then switched to a Ford Transit. They came across Champion Auto in Arundel in September 2011 as they drove through southern Maine. Mario Burnett, the owner, was shocked. Every week, he watched the show, and now the stars were in his yard. While Mike was shopping for motorbike gear, Frank bought oil cans, signs, and things related to the gas station. They spent 5 days visiting the area without any plans, just meeting people and following leads. That was the magic. 2 friends in a van going back in time. It helped that Frank and Mike were very different from each other, which made the show so good. Mike was tall and skinny, and he was very excited and full of life. Frank was quieter and more methodical, and he was shorter. Mike looked for old bikes and VW. Frank looked for toys, oil cans, and motorbike memorabilia. It was clear when they looked through Mario's house in Maine. Mike took the stuff for the bike. Frank took the gas station signs. They fit together like pieces of a puzzle. Mike said Frank had a lot of dreams once. Kind, funny, and sensitive. Fans also saw it, and they loved how the two odd couples got along. Frank's careful style spoke to some people. Some people related more to Mike's quick pace. That mix made the show easy to understand. Frank has always loved bikes, even before the show. When he was a teenager, he got a 1964 Harley Davidson, which most likely made his parents nervous. It was the first of many. He gained about 35 old bikes over the years and kept them in a barn that looked more like a museum. He had some very rare Indian bikes, like a 1938 model with 4 cylinders that he found in a barn in Philadelphia. There were also bikes from Britain, Vincent and a BSA Triumph. He really loved the Von Dutch Savoie, which was a 1942 Harley frame with a Volkswagen engine and paint job done by Von Dutch himself. Frank had seen it in a magazine many years before he found it at a yard sale. A lot of the bikes Frank owned had stories behind them, and that was what was important to him. He chose to share what he knew in 2013. He wrote a book called How to Choose Old Motorcycles. No one had to be an expert to do it. He wrote it for bike fans and people who want to start collecting bikes. The book was full of his own finds, tips, and tales. He told us how to find a secret gem, how to negotiate, and how to spot a good deal. Like on TV, his style was easy, funny, and clear. Frank wrote the book to share everything he had learned over the years. People should know about the machine's past and feel the same thrill he did when he brought one back to life. Another thing Frank loves is firehouse souvenirs, which came from his time as a fire inspector. He was able to see places that most collectors never get to because he had been checking out buildings for 25 years. Old fire stations, abandoned firehouses, and broken-down tools. Anyone who knew where to look could find it all. He began to gather it all. Old warning systems, leather helmets, and fire extinguishers made of brass. When they found something about fire on American pickers, you could see the joy on his face. For him, it wasn't just a group. It was about them. Frank was different because of how he thought about gathering. He saw more than just things. He heard stories. You could remember a time, a place, or a person from each piece. He often talked to the seller about the items passed for longer than he negotiated the price. Things that showed how Americans used to live were very important to him. Old tools, things that were put away, and weird toys. He had a lot of respect for war memorabilia and would sometimes give things to places that were connected to soldiers who had died. That was Frank. He thought that these stories should be kept alive, not hidden. Frank Fritz fought something his whole life that most people never saw. He dealt with Crohn's disease for more than 36 years. It was painful and tired him out, and it made daily life hard, especially when shooting American pickers. A close friend of Frank's once said that he had been living with it since he was 25 or 30 years old. He hit it hard, even though it hurt, while millions of people watched on TV and had no idea what he was going through. Things got better after he stopped drinking and worked on getting sober, but years of stress and illness had already hurt him. His health got worse and worse until it could no longer handle it. A lot of people didn't know how much he had been going through until he died at age 60. Beginning in 2017, things became known to the press. Frank was on the wrong side of the road when the cops pulled him over. He told them he had been drinking and taking Xanax, which he said his doctor had recommended for his anxiety. He failed the balance test and was charged with driving while drunk. He later said that the stress was caused by always being watched and judged. He said that a lot of people were watching him and that the stress made him give up. He didn't go to jail because he took a plea deal, but his image was already hurt. That moment pulled back the curtain on how fame wasn't just making him tired. It was also changing him. His relationship with co-star Mike Wolfe started to break down too. Frank said they hadn't talked in 2 years by 2021. The quiet hurt him more than not having any work to do. Mike never called after he had back surgery. Frank thought the show was always unfair, like Mike was the star and he was just going along for the ride. He laughed and said it was like being in a band with Steven Tyler. You'll never be the star. Frank didn't believe Mike when he said he missed Frank in an online message. He said it was fake and that it was likely written by someone else. He thought Mike had never said anything nice about him in real life. Still, they finally saw each other again in May 2023, over Memorial Day weekend, after being angry at each other for years. That was made possible by a friend we both have. It hurt even more after that. Frank hurt his back while moving something at home during the pandemic. It was terrible that he had to have surgery at that time. At the same time, there were lockdowns, being alone, and a split. That's when he started using painkillers too much. It began as a way to deal with pain, but it quickly got out of hand. Mike Wolfe said it was like seeing someone get blown away by a storm. They begged him to get clean and tried to help. Frank said he was okay, but he wasn't. He had to pass a drug test before the show would let him back on. He failed. His time on American Pickers was over after that. Frank's last show played in March 2020. He seemed to only need time off to heal at first. He even said later that he never left. He had back surgery not long ago and then CO hit. But by July 2021, Mike was sure he wasn't going to come back. He only wrote that he wished Frank the best in the message. Things were not the same behind the scenes. Frank had to have major surgery. He has 185 stitches and 2 rods in his back. He said he was ready to go back to work because he was fully healed. But the network had something else in mind. He wasn't brought back, and people who knew him well say that choice broke him. He felt like he was ignored and forgotten. After that, his health got worse. On July 14, 2022, Frank Fritz's life changed. A friend went to Frank's farm in Iowa that morning and saw him lying on the floor. He wasn't moving. He was unable to speak. Right away, the friend called 911. The friend said he might be having a seizure. I can't talk to him. Frank had a major stroke. He was 59 years old at the time. Even though doctors rushed him to the hospital, his brain was already badly hurt. He could not move or think clearly as much as before. He was moved to a care home after being in the hospital for a month. Those were just the first steps in a long and painful fight to stay alive. Frank still needed care all the time after he got back home. His health kept getting worse. A lot of emergency calls came in, like the one when he got asthma and had to go back to the hospital. Frank could no longer make decisions about his life or his money as the weeks went by. The court stepped in August 2022. His friend Chris Davis was given the power to make personal choices for him. His fortune, which was about $6 million, was given to a bank to handle. The court papers made everything very clear. Frank was sick and couldn't look after himself. He wasn't able to make sure he had food, a place to stay, or even basic medical care. He was in danger of getting hurt badly or dying if no one helped him. It wasn't easy, though, even with help. By order of the court, both the Guardian and the bank made changes. Every year, the judges looked over what they did to make sure Frank was really being cared for. The cost was another thing. While he was on American Pickers, Frank made a lot of money, but his savings quickly ran out. About $30,000 a month went to his hospital bills. It came to more than $350,000 a year. At that point, his only source of income was stocks that brought in about $60,000 a year. Not nearly enough. Frank needed nursing care 24 hours a day, special equipment, physical therapy, and care for other major illnesses like COPD and Crohn's disease. Jerry Jandro, who was very close to him, said that there were even plans to sell Frank's old things at auction after he died. He'd do really well in a sale, I think. Jerry said that his fans would back it. Frank's health got worse as time went on. Jerry said it broke his heart to see him. Frank was missing a body part. John remembered that when he tried to lift his arm, it would just fall. The fact that Frank knew exactly what was going on made it even worse. It was clear to him how far he had dropped. He was unable to talk as normally. He was stuck and couldn't do anything. Frank had lost his will to fight, Jerry thought. He said that people often lose their will to live when they are tired. He might have lived longer if he hadn't given up, that's for sure. The last call then came. Co-star Mike Wolfe from American Pickers with Frank for a long time was told on September 30, 2024, that Frank was dying quickly. Mike ran over to help him. He held Frank's hand, rubbed his chest, and whispered to him for an hour. Mike said, "I told him I wasn't mad at him. I told him I loved him." Mike sent Frank one last message right before he died. "Find your mom, find her now." Frank died at 8:50 p.m. Mike was there. Also there were Frank's mom and Annette Overberlander, who was her best friend. In the end, Annette said that Mike had always been there for Frank. At the end, he was with them. She told them both that was fine. Many people were shocked by what they found in Frank Fritz's old shed after he died in September 2024. Something amazing was kept from everyone for years. There are more than 75 old motorbikes, and each one has a story and a place in history. Some of them looked like they were brand new from the mill. Others were dirty and rusty, and it was clear they were waiting for another chance. The very first bike was made in 1912. Some were so rare prototypes that experts thought they were gone for good. A lot of people didn't know that Frank had been gathering all of this in secret. Some close friends were the only ones who knew what he had hidden. People in libraries all over the world got very excited when they heard the news. A lot of people thought it might be one of the most important motorbike finds in a long time. People were amazed by the details even more as they looked more closely. During an interesting show of American Pickers, a 1922 Ace 4 bike was bought for only $45,000. It was worth almost $200,000 now. A 1939 Indian 4 called the Aristocrat that was worth over $115,000 was another star. There were Indian Scouts before the war, such as a 1928 model that still had its original paint on it. There were also 3 Harley-Davidson panheads from the 1950s that Frank had. They were all in different stages of repair. The most surprising thing was a 1947 Indian Chief prototype that was one of a kind. They said it might be worth more than $250,000 because it didn't look like any other type they knew of. This collection was great for more than just the bikes, though. There were dozens of handwritten notebooks next to them that had been carefully kept for more than 30 years. Frank had written down where each motorbike came from, who had owned it before, and what parts he needed to find. He wrote about how hard it was to get some bikes to run again, how much time he spent in the garage, and how happy he was when something finally did. He would sometimes write little notes about how a ride made him feel or what it made him think of. They added to the collection and made it more than just tools. They told a story that made everything even more expensive for collectors. The collection was thought to be worth more than $2 million by the time the full inventory was done. Some people thought it might go over $3 million once the bidding started, since Frank's name was on everything. Auction houses fought hard to be able to handle the sale. People knew it wasn't just a deal to buy old bikes. It was about having a piece of American history that had been carefully kept safe by a man who knew how valuable it was. Frank loved history in more ways than just bikes, though. The old, beat-up van was hidden in the land. It didn't look like much at first glance, but this wasn't any car. In their early days, when they were still unknown, Aerosmith used the same one to drive from show to show. In 2018, Frank and Mike Wolfe found it in the woods of Massachusetts. They paid $25,000 for it and fixed it up. The band was shocked when they saw it again in 2019. Joe Perry thought it was great. An original member, Ray Tabino, got upset when he thought about how they used to split a few bucks after paying for gas and tolls. That van carried more than just their gear, it also carried their hopes and dreams. Then there were the strange things. Frank had paid $9,500 for a huge elephant head from a taxidermy collector in the past. Jack White of the White Stripes eventually bought the head. He traded antiques and cash for it, in part because of his famous record elephant. Animal rights groups were upset about that purchase, but it showed that Frank was ready to buy things that other people wouldn't touch. He also had a real Jello wagon from the early 1900s that was used to pass out ads for the treat in small towns. You can see that one in a museum too. Frank could tell what was important, whether it was music, food, or strange Americana. He even started collecting things from science fiction. In one episode of American Pickers, he and Mike found 4 Star Wars versions of early Yoda. There was a chance they were fan art at first, but a former Lucasfilm artist said they were real. Based on early designs from 1978 and made from molds inspired by Albert Einstein, Frank paid a fair price for them, and now each one is worth more than $6,000. It showed that he liked collecting more than just bikes and signs. He knew that pop culture had its own strength, but just as people were honoring Frank's life, there was a big court case. He sued in February 2025 along with his father, William Bill Fritz. He said the 2023 will that was turned in was not real. Bill says that Frank never signed it. The paper gave most of Frank's $6 million estate to his friends and aides. Bill wasn't there. He said he earned everything because he was Frank's only real family member and the only one who had lived. The court document asked for a trial with the jurors to settle everything. Things quickly became more difficult in the case. Frank had a major stroke in 2022, and soon after, he was put under guardianship. During that time, a judge said Frank wasn't able to make his own choices. That decision became the most important part of Bill's case. What right did Frank have to sign a will if he couldn't take care of himself? That's not all. Bill said he hadn't seen his son in those last few years. He said that they had been fishing together in St. Thomas before and that he had been pushed aside without cause. The courts will now decide what is real and what isn't. As more proof comes in, everyone is waiting to see how this part of Frank Fritz's story ends. One thing is already clear, though. Frank left behind a lot more than just old things and bikes. It was built on emotion, memory, and a deep love for the past that he left behind. In an old car or a rusty engine, he saw stories that were worth telling. And now everyone can see them.